We have thoughts on the latest federal court battle over posting of the Ten Commandments in the public schools. Of course, a fan of the Nazis donates to the GOP Ohio governor hopeful. And Rebecca Watson talks about appearing in the Epstein files and why the cancer of misogyny continues to affect the atheist and freethought movement.
This is Secular Left with Doug Berger, an independent, religion-free, progressive viewpoint on topics of the day.
On February the 20th, the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in the case of Reverend Roque versus Brumley. And it was a law in Louisiana that would require schools to post the Ten Commandments in every classroom. And Americans United and some other people sued the state. And that's what it had gone to a panel, a 3-judge panel. And then in the appeal, the state requested that the full Fifth Circuit rule on it. And also of note, the Fifth Circuit is probably the most conservative circuit in the Court of Appeals. They're the one that the Fifth Circuit is the people that a lot of the right wingers go to when they're shopping for a judge or when they were shopping for a judge to go against President Biden when President Biden was still in office. House Bill 71 requires public schools to permanently display a government-approved Protestant version of the Ten Commandments in every classroom. Well, and that's from the press release from Americans United, and that is true. That in this court case, they were, that was one of the things, but this is one of the, I call it the Santa Claus law. And I call it the Santa Claus law is because what they're doing is they are, the right-wingers, the Christian nationalists are taking the tact that people took to get manger scenes put on courthouses. If people remember that, and the court makes the law, House Bill 71 makes an allusion to this point, is that if you take a religious symbol and surround it by secular symbols, then the government can display that religious symbol. So in the case of the manger, they could put a manger on the courthouse steps as long as they put like Frosty the Snowman or Santa Claus or reindeer along with it. and then the Supreme Court ruled back then that was permissible. That meant that the intent was not religious. Even though you put a manger on a courthouse lawn, it's definitely an intent, a religious intent. So the Christian nationalists currently came up with this cut and paste law because this law that in Louisiana was cut and pasted, and it's being considered in Ohio and some other states as well. I think Texas has a similar law or under consideration. And so it would call it a historical document act to put up historical documents. And one of those historical documents that a school can choose to put up is the Ten Commandments. And as long as they don't spend any tax dollars on it, and that's not the only one that they put up, then they believe it's going to be permissible. And the Fifth Circuit they didn't rule on and that was the other thing, is they didn't rule on the constitutionality of the law. What they said was, on February 20th, was that until the schools decide which documents to put up, then there is no injury. So they can't rule on the constitutionality until the law is implemented. And that's how I knew, when I read that, that's how I knew that was the consideration, was it's the Santa Claus effect on this. so that they had like the Magna Carta, I think was one. I'm thinking, well, at least in the Ohio, Magna Carta, the Mayflower Compact, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and other, quote, historical documents, unquote. And so what it is, and this is what would happen, is they would get this law passed and implemented, and you would not see a lot of Declaration of Independence or constitutions put up, but you would see a lot of Ten Commandment posters put up, because then local churches and other Christian nationalist groups would then get a lot of these posters printed and donate to the school. And that's what it is. And so basically what this decision of February the 20th is going to let this law get implemented, and then they'll be able to come back and sue whatever particular school puts up those posters. So in the end, it might actually work out that they won't put up any Ten Commandments posters because the schools don't want to be sued. And it would be the school that would be sued, not the state. I'm guessing that's probably what would happen. At least that's what, if I was Americans United, that's what I would do, is I would sue individual school districts or threaten to sue individual school districts if they allow the Ten Commandments poster to be put up. Because the facts are that the Ten Commandments are not a historical document. It's a document. It's not even a document. It's a biblical part. It's parts from a Bible that's open to interpretation, depending on what sect that you're in. So that's the first thing, is they're going to have to decide which Ten Commandments to put up, which version of the Ten Commandments to put up. And the law that's under consideration in Ohio, they actually state which Ten Commandments could be put up. So that right there crosses the line anyway, because a state government, a local government, a government of any kind is not allowed to get involved in religion or into theology. They are not allowed to decide which one is proper and which one is not. So, yeah, it was bad news that the Fifth Circuit, it wasn't unexpected. Well, it kind of was unexpected. But I just want to let you know, though, that the coverage from at least Americans United kind of disappointed me, because they are putting it forward as, they already ruled decades ago that the Ten Commandments can't be in a public school, which is true, but this is a different form of what they're supposed to do. And so what they should do is they should fight the Santa Claus effect of trying to drape this religious symbol with secular symbols to make it legal. That's what they should be arguing about or arguing against. Because that is what, and so I understand the court's ruling. I don't agree with it, because I think they should have ruled that the law was unconstitutional, because you're going to have some schools, I think in Texas, they're suing some schools. Some group might be ACLU, not sure, that put up some Ten Commandment posters. So basically, you're going to expose individual school districts to lawsuits that are going to have to be paid for by the taxpayers, because the federal court didn't want to get involved because there's no injury yet. And so that could be a problem later on.
For more information on the topics in this episode and the links used, visit secularleft.us.
Now, normally, I would not be sharing a story from the tabloid The Daily Mail. The Daily Mail is based in the UK. And it is a tabloid, which means that it's a little bit sensationalistic, sometimes a little bit not true, but bear with me because the other day they had an article. The title of the article was Vivek Ramaswamy Pocketed Cash from Notorious Nazi Reenactor as his Ohio campaign hits the skids. And so that seemed all, the Nazi reenactor part, that just seemed all too familiar to me because I've heard that come up before. So I read the article. And this starts out, it says, Vivek Ramaswamy, a 2024 presidential candidate, failed presidential candidate, let me add, now running for Ohio governor, is the latest Republican politician who has accepted a campaign donation from a former GOP congressional hopeful who liked to cosplay as a Nazi. The Daily Mail has learned that Ramaswamy's campaign accepted a $500 donation on August the 15th from Richard Ayotte using public campaign disclosure data. That's how they found out the information. Ayotte was among the Tea Party-aligned hopefuls to try to enter Congress in the 2010 election, but his campaign was upended when The Atlantic published photographs of him in a 5th SS Panzer Division Viking uniform. And so this guy, Richard Ayotte, he wasn't just enamored of Nazis. He actually dressed up as one to be a reenactor, kind of the war reenactors. If you're familiar with the ones for like the War of 1812 and the Civil War, well, he was a Nazi reenactor for World War II. And the other thing, too, is Richard Ayotte's family they founded and owned the Seaway Foodtown grocery chain here in Northwest Ohio, where I'm from. And the company was sold to Spartan Stores, and they closed all of them down in 2003. So that's how I remember Richard Ayotte. And I also remember his campaign imploding after that article came out with pictures of him in his SS Panzer Nazi uniform. You know, that's just not having an interest in it. You know, and I get it. You know, some people, they like the uniforms. They just ignore what those uniforms stand for. It's just like those guys that like to dress up like Confederates. You know, it's supposedly about their heritage, but they totally ignore what those uniforms stood for. And so the Daily Mail published this article about Ramaswamy taking the money from Ayotte. So it was just cracking me up. So I'm guessing there's some people that are in the right wing, in the right wing Republican Party, the Trump people, that don't like Ramaswamy for some reason. I have the feeling it has to do with the fact that he doesn't look like he's from around here. There's been a lot of comments I've seen on social media where things have come up about him, the articles and social media posts, and invariably, at least one of the comments will talk about how he looks like he's an immigrant, and they question his citizenship. Now, to be clear, Vivek was born in the United States. His parents immigrated, but he was born in the United States in the Cincinnati area. So he's an Ohio native. He just doesn't look like he's from Ohio. And I think a lot of the bigots that infest the Republican Party have a problem with that. And I think that's what this article is talking about, is they're trying to torpedo his campaign. Now, there's another guy that is attempting to run in the governor's race. He's from the Perrysburg area. So my guess is he probably had something to do with this story getting out, you know, because of the Northwest Ohio connection. And he's the guy, he wants to run so that people don't have to vote for an Indian in the election. Now, I'm not saying that Republicans wouldn't vote for him. If anybody remembers back many years ago when Bobby Jindal was the governor of Louisiana, and his parents were immigrants as well from India. So, it's possible for Republicans to do it. I just don't think in this era of Trump that Ramaswamy, he doesn't have, it's not a slam dunk for him, put it that way. There's still a possibility that he's going to survive the primary and become the nominee. I think it's a toss-up, but I think he has a good chance. But I don't think his election in the following November is a done deal or a slam dunk, even though the Republican Party in Ohio has done their due diligence to suppress voters and gerrymander the state. And that's the only thing I think that is going to save his campaign for governor, is the shenanigans that the party's doing to try to make sure that he does win. And that's the thing that worries me the most. But I just thought it was funny that Richard Ayotte came back into the news. It was just cracking me up.
You are listening to the Secular Left podcast.
One of the things that a lot of podcasters and other citizen journalists like to use is Substack. It's a newsletter platform that you can write your stories and send them to people. You can either have subscriptions and stuff like that. Well, I have an adjunct Substack space for this podcast called Secular Left. Is it called Secular Left Nuggets? Yeah, Secular Left Nuggets. And there's a link on the website for it. If you already have an account on Substack, you can look for it. I don't charge a subscription, mainly because it's not something I frequently use. But I have like little bits, like something I want people to know about or something that catches my fancy. But more than likely, I'm not going to do a full podcast episode about it or a full podcast segment about. And so there's a couple. I had something posted in January, and then I had a couple posted in February. And so just as a kind of give you a taste of it, is I'll read what I have down. And this is from Secular Left Nuggets, and this is just brief little tidbits that I think are important. The first one that I published on January the 6th, it's titled Ohio's Robert Sprague is Not Too Smart. And the subtitle, maybe that's why Vivek Ramaswamy dumped him for lieutenant governor. Robert Sprague is currently the treasurer of the state of Ohio, and he's running for Secretary of State due to term limits. It's the Ohio GOP circle jerk, because they all kind of shift offices. That's how powerful the GOP is in Ohio, that these people just, like Sprague is treasurer, he wants to go to Secretary of State. Secretary of State Frank LaRose, the current Secretary of State, I believe he's running for auditor or whatever. They just kind of realign the deck chairs on the Titanic. And he posted on his Facebook page recently about another conservative outrage from Minnesota, where they allow people to vouch for other people when they vote. Oh, Lord. And I have an image of that post. And this is what he writes. He says, Minnesota is a hot mess because state law permits asinine practices like vouching, allowing your buddy to verify your eligibility by simply saying, yeah, he's good. And it says, I'll work with President Trump to protect our vote from idiotic policies like this. Without even making it seem he even understands the policy, but he knows he's against it. The GOP has been in control of Ohio since 2011. And Frank LaRose has been our Secretary of State for several years, and he claims often how secure our elections are in Ohio, even after claiming there's a lot of fraud here too. He also opposed federal meddling in Ohio's election process when the president was Joe Biden, but LaRose and Sprague want to do what Trump wants to do now. It's also ironic because Sprague includes a link to a Minnesota news station that explains how the vouching policy actually works, yet it is obvious Sprague never read it. I'm sure you know quite a few people, friends of yours, that do that. Is they'll get outraged about a topic based on a headline, and they won't even know the details. So this is how it's explained on this news site. It says, vouching as explained by the Minnesota Secretary of State's office is when a registered voter from your precinct can go with you to the polling place to sign an oath confirming your address. The explanation goes on to read, a registered voter can vouch for up to 8 voters. You cannot vouch for others if someone vouched for you. According to state statutes, an employee who provides proof that they are employed by and working in a residential facility in the precinct and vouching for a resident in the facility signs an oath in the presence of the election judge, vouching that the voter or employee personally knows that individual is a resident of the precinct. In a sit-down interview leading up to the 2025 general election, KTTC Capitol reporter Quinn Gorham asked Simon about the integrity of vouching. And Simon said, in the years I've done this job, I cannot recall a single instance of a false vouching because people know they're making an oath under penalty of perjury and they're going to get busted. They're going to get caught if they lie. And I haven't seen any evidence that is an issue. So people who vouch for others have to be eligible voters in the precinct. And they have to sign an oath. And the state has never recorded any false vouching. In order for there to be the kind of fraud Republicans insist exists, would take a large coordination of people if they wanted to use the vouching process to do it. Instead, Sprague and the Ohio GOP will use this made-up outrage as an excuse to create more election restrictions. And that's what Sprague wants to do. So the next Secular Left Nugget article was from February the 4th, and it is titled, Will the Real Frank LaRose Please Stand Up? Frank LaRose, Ohio's current Secretary of State, sued the Biden administration in 2024 when President Biden directed federal agencies to find ways to offer voter registration services as part of their regular duties. The lawsuit claimed that only the states could encourage people to register to vote and do get-out-the-vote campaigns. Then they have a quote from the article. It says, states played the primary role in conducting elections, with Congress playing a vital but carefully circumscribed secondary role. A group of elected Republicans, including Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, wrote in a lawsuit challenging the order's constitutionality. Moreover, the limited role for the federal government in elections is vested in Congress alone, not the president acting unilaterally without congressional authorization or appropriation. No statute passed by Congress authorizes the executive order, and the president has no inherent constitutional authority to issue it. And the title of the article was GOP slammed Biden's voting order as federal overreach, but praised Trump's. And so they filed that lawsuit in 2024 when Biden was still in office. And I continue. I say, this is not the first time LaRose has been two-faced about elections. It's his standard playbook. One side of his mouth, he claims each election in Ohio he has supervised has been the best, most secure election in the country and should be used as a model. Out of the other side of his mouth, he makes specious claims about voter fraud and pushes more and more voter suppression laws in the state. He's also known to sabotage ballot language to try and tip the scales on an issue he opposes, like a ballot measure to end gerrymandering in the state, which succeeded in torpedoing that. The other one that he tried to sabotage was the reproductive rights amendment. And luckily, he was not successful on that one. Trump's proposals to nationalize elections would be far worse than Biden's simple get-out-the-vote efforts. And Trump's earlier attempt at a voting executive order was also worse than the Biden executive order. President Donald Trump issued his own executive order on voting Tuesday by any measure and encroaches on the authority of states to run elections far more directly than Biden's, While Biden's order merely directed federal agencies to find ways to offer voter registration services, Trump's aims to coerce states to change their rules for accepting mail ballots and empowers Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency to subpoena state records to prove voter fraud, among other steps. But LaRose had a different response this time. He praised Trump's decisive leadership to protect the integrity of our elections and welcomed clear standards on election administration. I wonder which Frank will show up if Trump keeps wanting to take over state elections. And then finally, the other last nugget got published on February the 12th, and it was on a visit to Toledo by Ohio Lieutenant Governor Jim Tressel, the former college football coach. It says, back on February the 4th, the title of the article was Lieutenant Governor Coach Tressel has education photo op at private school. And then subtitled, More Proof that the Ohio GOP Hates Public Schools. And then it starts out, back on February the 4th, there was a photo op and story published in the Toledo Blade. Lieutenant Governor Jim Tressel exercises with students at Our Lady of Perpetual Help, publicizing the Team Tressel Fitness Challenge at Our Lady of Perpetual Help Elementary in Toledo. Lieutenant Governor of Ohio and former national champion coach at Ohio State and Youngstown State, Jim Tressel has been traveling the state talking about fitness for young people. I don't have an issue with encouraging physical fitness in children, and the Team Tressel Fitness Challenge seems like a great way to excite kids about it, although I have heard some negative stuff about it recently. And Lieutenant Governor Tressel is a great spokesperson for that effort. He's always good at public speaking. My issue with the photo op in Toledo was it took place at a private school. A state elected official promoting a program for all Ohio children chose to do a photo op at a private school. Ohio's government has been undermining and underfunding public schools for years. In a recent budget, the state has given at least $1 billion for vouchers to attend private schools while refusing to even fund free lunches for children, as we are told that is unsustainable. The Republican Party has been in charge of Ohio government since 2011, and our public schools ranked 5th best in the nation in K-12 education the year before Governor John Kasich took office. Ohio schools slid to 21st by 2023, and a recent U.S. News & World Report puts Ohio at number 38 in its rankings of educational attainment, well into the bottom half of states. If the Republicans really wanted us to believe they cared about the public schools, the Team Tressel Fitness Challenge photo op would have taken place at a local public school. And that was based on a letter to the editor that I got published in the Toledo Blade recently about that photo op. And so that is you're updated on my secular nuggets. And if you have some time, I would appreciate it if you just checked it out. And subscribe if you're wanting to get more information from me.
For more information on the topics in this episode and the links used, visit secularleft.us.
I am in my 30th year as a leader in the humanist movement. After serving many years in leadership positions in the humanist community of Central Ohio in Columbus, I founded and have led the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie since 2018. Being a leader of a group means that I've interacted with many people over the years, from speakers for meetings to members or friends of the group, and that variety of people naturally means my interactions and personal feelings have varied. When you are a leader, you sometimes have to make compromises to reach a consensus. I have worked with some individuals that personally I would not interact with outside of the mission we were working on together. As I tell people when talking about this aspect, there have been some people I wouldn't go over to their house to have dinner, for example. In the group activity, you withhold your real feelings and treat them as diplomatic as possible so you can accomplish your shared goal. Years ago, I worked with a guy who had sued his local government over a Latin cross on public land he wanted to have removed in the name of separation of church and state. I devoted some space on my personal website at the time to the issue, shared his essays and news reports about his fight. Then I got to meet him in person at an AHA conference in Columbus. The guy was an arrogant asshole who I would never be friends with outside of what we worked on. He was an atheist and I believed in his cause, but personally I wouldn't go to his house for dinner at any time. He was just an awful person to talk to. When I started Sholey in 2018, I made a point to not talk about or support certain individuals in the atheist, freethought, humanist communities who have become problematic in one way or another. I was not going to work with them, promote their work, or share their views to my members. As host of the Glass City Humanist podcast, I've made a point in my stipulations about guests I interview that should they turn out to be terrible people, like if they get accused of sexual harassment or convicted of child abuse, I would remove their episode and expunge them from the show website completely. I refuse to give a platform to any terrible people, no matter what our shared mission is or the shared outcome we desire. I will also call out the bad people when they are being bad people, no matter if they are religious or atheists. A national news story that's been going on for several years now is about Jeffrey Epstein. He's the American billionaire, child sex offender, convicted child sex offender, serial rapist, and human trafficker. He pled guilty and was convicted in 2008 by a Florida state court of procuring a child for prostitution and of soliciting a prostitute, and served 13 months in jail. He was arrested on federal charges in 2019, but he died in his jail cell, allegedly, before he could be tried in court. Epstein is an interesting character because he starts out as a failed teacher at a prep school, and by the 1990s was telling other rich white guys what to do with their money and becoming very wealthy himself. President Trump and other Republicans ran their 2024 campaign in part on releasing the Epstein files on their claim that it only contained information on rich and powerful Democrats. When Trump was elected again, his administration refused to release the files. The speculation and rumors led to a firestorm until Congress passed a law that required the Department of Justice to release all the case files. The administration has been dragging their feet and releasing blobs of files, usually on a Friday, to try and lessen any blowback to them. And we've also found out that President Trump is mentioned thousands of times in these files. The Department of Justice has set up a web page where you can do a name search of the files, and that is what I really want to talk about. I think one transgression that no matter your politics or religion, we all oppose is child abuse, and especially child sex abuse. Just getting accused of child sex abuse can ruin your life, so imagine your life if you are convicted of it. You become a pariah in your community, and any good you may have done in the past is just wiped away. When I was growing up in Findlay, I had a school friend whose older brother was arrested and charged with raping a man. My friend's family immediately lost friends and even a job because of what their son was accused of doing. And this was before he was even tried in a court of law. My friend's mother had been the den mother of a Cub Scout pack, and she was removed from that. The family eventually had to move out of the county to try and get a fresh start. Becoming persona non grata for child sex abuse is the usual result of such an event becoming public, unless you are a wealthy white man, as we have seen, as the names associated with Epstein have come out. So far, only Jeffrey Epstein and his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, have been the only people prosecuted for child sex abuse and human trafficking. And Maxwell is currently in prison serving a sentence for sex trafficking. Let me be very clear. If someone was a business associate of Epstein or a social friend prior to his conviction in 2008 and knew what he was doing or even participated in that abuse, they are just as liable for the crime and need to be prosecuted. If you still associated with Epstein after 2008, then you are a moron and need to be called out in public and shamed, maybe made the ward of a court. Rebecca Watson is someone I admire and have been following on her YouTube channel and social media for several years. She has been active in the Freethought community, has appeared at conferences, and has advocated for women and other marginalized groups in our community. And Rebecca is mentioned in the Epstein files. She is neither a friend or associate of the man, but her name comes up in emails in the files for a specific reason. Several of the men who palled around with Epstein rode on his private jet and accepted his money for their projects, and that included Steven Pinker, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and Lawrence Krauss, to name a few. All of these men are, quote, celebrities, unquote, in the atheist Freethought skeptic community, and all of them, except for Dennett, have had conflicts with Rebecca Watson. Lawrence Krauss is the main reason Watson's name comes up in the Epstein files, because Krauss reached out to Epstein many times to get advice on Krauss's own issues with his alleged sexual harassment claims and claims of sexual assault against him. Richard Dawkins also wrote to Epstein about Rebecca. Watson does an excellent job in a video on her channel of explaining this whole ordeal that she has been dealing with for years, from men who just hate a woman who won't bow down to them. So I'm going to throw the link to that video because you really need to watch it. One point in the video that made my jaw drop is when Rebecca recounts the crap storm that was the Women in Secularism conference in 2013. I remember vividly reading about how then President of the Center for Inquiry, Ron Lindsay, gave the introduction. Or as Rebecca tells it in her video, he forced himself to give the introduction.
The final straw came in 2013. Women at CFI had worked really hard to put on their second annual Women in Secularism conference, and Ron Lindsay insisted that as president of CFI, he should be able to deliver the introduction. He did so, and he used his time on stage to spotlight criticism of feminists for silencing male voices because those men have privilege. In his speech, Ron Lindsay bemoaned the situation where the concept of privilege is used to try to silence others as a justification for saying, shut up and listen. Shut up because you're a man and you cannot possibly know what it's like to experience X, Y, and Z, and anything you say is bound to be mistaken in some way. But of course, you're too blinded by your privilege even to realize that. This approach doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work for me, said the man addressing an audience of women at the Women in Secularism conference that was entirely organized by women for women. It's enforced silence, he said, dogma spread by the likes of the religious and, of course, the Marxists.
I remember back then that a lot of women with CFI and elsewhere quit the Freethought movement over that incident, and the treatment by some of these men in particular. A friend of mine who was a local CFI leader eventually left the movement entirely because of the rampant misogyny from people like Krauss, Dawkins, and Lindsay. Watson sums up her video.
Maybe we can build a secular movement through progressive humanistic ideals and good people doing good things for their communities. The idea that someone would think that, let alone say it out loud, terrified Ron Lindsay, just as it terrified Lawrence Krauss and Richard Dawkins and Jeffrey Epstein and every other mediocre rich man who was trying to coast by and just enjoy their lives. They were furious because it's like, what do you mean you don't need us? We're rich, we're famous, we have parties on tropical islands where all of our wildest dreams come true. And I don't give a fuck. You guys suck. You're idiots. I hate you. Just look at how scared of me Lawrence Krauss is. In one email, he's talking about some letter he wrote to try to defend himself from the BuzzFeed article. I couldn't find it, but I did find this evidence that he spent a lot of time working out exactly how vaguely he could describe me when trying to castigate me as ringleader of the movement to impugn leading male atheists, because Rebecca and her crowd are very, very vicious, and I don't want to start too much of a fire there. Yeah, you know what? You were fucking right to be scared of me, you disgusting, pathetic sex pest. I hope you never again do a lecture where at least one person in the crowd doesn't ask you exactly what you did on Jeffrey Epstein's island. And I hope that Ron Lindsay really enjoys having a little cameo in this latest release, really cementing his legacy as a man who enthusiastically helped run interference for a man who openly and gleefully harassed and abused dozens of women over the course of decades and who kept company with the absolute worst pedophile in human history. All so that Ron could keep his boys' club running without the pesky interference of women like me saying, hey, maybe you could stop talking long enough to listen to what we're saying. Hope it was worth it.
Decades later, and we still have not dealt with this cancer of petty rich men and their snowflake feelings of being called out by a woman for being a terrible human being. This is why I continue not to support or work with or support any of those men, and neither will my group as long as I have a say in it.
Thank you for listening. Secular Left is hosted, written, and produced by Doug Berger, and he is solely responsible for the content. Our theme music is Dank and Nasty, composed using the Amplify Studio. For more information on the topics in this episode and the links used, visit secularleft.us. If you want to support the show, share it with your friends or visit our merch store at secularleft.us/shop. See you next time.